Hey there friends, so we are out here in beautiful sunny San Diego at La Jolla Shores. Very stoked to be comparing the brand new Mavic 3 to the Mavic 2. So let's see how much better this drone is and if you really have to pay to upgrade. To me, what it feels like is DJI really sharpened this tool from all perspectives. Some things are objectively better and other things are just different than the old version. And there's no saying whether they're good or bad. It all depends on who you are, how you use these tools, and what is most important to you. I'm gonna show you side-by-side examples in this video. So hopefully that helps make up your mind and decide if you need to get one. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna actually launch both of these drones simultaneously. I've got my buddy Lucky here to help. My wonderful assistant. So let's have you take Mavic 2. Look how quiet that is. We're going to do an elevation speed test, so how fast the drones can fly upwards. 3, 2, 1, throttle. Oh shit, I forgot to record. My bad. 3, 2, 1, go. Oh, I'm crushing you. You're maxed out? Maxed out. All right, 85, 100, 150, 200. Let's bring him down here. Now we're gonna race in sport mode up the coast. Okay. 3, 2, 1, fire. Keep going, keep going. That's pretty comparable. Yeah. I see me in your shot. Okay, I've got a lot more comparisons that I'm excited to show you, but first, we've got to talk about the cameras. So the most relevant change is that we got a new sensor. Yay! Both of them are 20 megapixels. The Mavic 2 actually has slightly more pixels on the long edge than the newer Mavic 3. This may be surprising and even seem like a downgrade, but I can assure you that it's not. It's important to understand that unlike people, not all pixels are created equal, because the bigger the pixel, then the better the detail, and the better the sharpness, and the better low light it can see in the darkness. The Mavic 2 has a 1-inch sensor, while the new Mavic 3 has a 4/3 sensor, which actually has about twice as much surface area. This means that each individual pixel is larger. It's the classic quality over quantity trade-off. Having larger pixels means better clarity and low light performance. I'm going to show you a lot of examples proving that later in the video. The sensor's aspect ratio changed as well. Instead of a 3:2 ratio, it's now a 4:3. The Mavic 2 has an equivalent focal length of 28mm, while the Mavic 3 now has a 24mm lens, which gives you a slightly wider field of view. Each one has pros and cons depending how you use it. For landscape and architectural shots, I like having a wide lens to fit more into the frame. This also makes it easier to achieve those bird's eye views without flying above 400 feet. On the flip side, in my opinion, video shots of a subject can look more cinematic at longer, more compressed focal lengths, because it introduces more parallax movement to the background. Also, the M2 has a really nice feature where you can punch into a 40mm lens in video. I love having both options on the Mavic 2, and I use them a lot. Also, there's a small advantage of a longer lens when it comes to creating panoramas, because stitching the same image will produce a higher resolution file. Yes, the Mavic 3 has that secondary zoom lens that they call Explore mode, but the truth is, it kinda sucks. It only has a 1/2-inch 12 megapixel sensor, a fixed 4.4 aperture, no manual settings, and no raw photos. Alright, let's start pixel peeping this image quality. But first, a couple quick disclaimers. Pause to read. One of the most undeniable improvements is the clarity. In almost every video test I shot, the M3 was noticeably sharper when you zoom into the details. Even when both drones are shooting at 4K, but especially if you shoot at 5K and downscale to a 4K project. Here's a few examples showing the 4K quality comparison on each drone. The Mavic 2 just feels like it has a soft, hazy filter over it in some of the shots. However, when looking at the photos from each of these drones, the difference wasn't quite as clear. Sometimes it looked sharper and other times it looked about the same. One thing that does seem consistent is that the M3 seems to have better sharpness throughout the entire frame, whereas the M2 seems to get softer towards the edges. You may have also noticed a color difference, and that's no mistake. With this release, DJI promoted better color science with the new Hasselblad NCS. This is the default in normal mode. I definitely noticed the difference in color representation. I'm not totally used to it yet, but I do think it's much more accurate to reality, which is a good thing. Previously in the M2, the blues always appeared a little oversaturated and teal, and the warm tones appear unnaturally pink. Now those yellows and oranges that are common in sunsets seem much more accurate. Also keep in mind the log video profiles are now different. The M3 is much flatter and claims to have more dynamic range. It also now shoots 10-bit with 200 megabit per second bitrate, so a heavy color grade should look much cleaner. One very exciting improvement that I did not expect at all was when analyzing flares and highlights. I love shooting backlit scenes into the sun, but on the previous Mavics and even on the Phantoms, they always handled light flares pretty terribly. Not only did you get dirty looking lens flares with those artificial long stretching lines, but it also produced these really weird red circles when pointing into the sun. Super happy to report that with the larger sensor, the Mavic 3 now has much improved flare performance. It's still not perfect, and you can see this green artifact produced, but you can tell the flare results are much more clean and natural looking. In addition to flares, the Mavic series always had pretty bad highlight fall off, meaning the transition away from a bright area like the sun on the horizon is really abrupt and produced some very strange color artifacts. Based on my personal testing, it looks like the highlight fall off in still photos is much more natural looking. However, strangely, to my eye, I don't really notice that same difference when it comes to video shots, only in stills. Alright, let's talk low light. This just might be the biggest and most exciting difference between these two drones. Over the years with the Mavic 2, I almost never shot anything over 400 ISO. With the Mavic 3, I'm now super comfortable shooting video scenes at 3200 ISO without getting a gross, grainy image. I'm pretty blown away how well this new sensor handles low light conditions. It still has noise at higher ISOs, but the scale and color variation of the noise is way more controlled. I'd still avoid 6400 ISO, but with noise reduction, I can see night shoots becoming totally usable. However, once again, with good news comes bad news. When it comes to the photos out of these two cameras, I was left a little bit confused. I had mixed results. In some cases, the raw photos from the M3 actually looked a bit more grainy, but in other cases, the Mavic 3 was much cleaner around the edges. In other high ISO examples, I noticed the M2 camera attempts to artificially remove color noise, but the result is totally flat and desaturated pixels. So that's definitely not good either. But there is some more good news for those of you like me who like to shoot those nice twilight scenes. We did seem to get an improvement in stability that will allow for cleaner long exposures. Another very pleasant surprise here. In the public release, DJI bragged about improved stability. Based on my test, it seems to be true. In these tests, I'm hovering both drones about 100 feet in the air without touching anything. When looking closely, you can see the Mavic 2 has a lot more camera movement over time. This is especially important for those photographers who shoot a lot of twilight scenes like myself. Instead of relying on a high ISO, I can just extend my shutter speeds to 1 or 2 seconds to capture enough light. I played around with some really long exposures and I was pretty amazed. I was able to pull off a few super clear 8-second exposures with virtually no evidence of motion blur. Amazing. But don't get it twisted, the results aren't this perfect every time. I had plenty of tests where 8 seconds was just too long and blurry. Elevation and wind will play important factors. So overall, with all these factors combined, I can just trust that when I send the Mavic up in the air to take a shot, on average, it will perform better in most situations. I mean, just look at this example of a twilight photo, which is super common for me. Almost everything about the Mavic 3 looks better. The clarity, haze, noise, stability, especially near the edges of the frame. Look, I'm sure the difference is insignificant to a lot of people, and that's fine. But as someone who makes large prints quite often, any improvement in detail is very welcome to me. The last thing to note is improved battery life, which is great for obvious reasons. You can take your time with your shots and get more out of each flight, but I'm most excited about this for hyperlapses. My real life tests show it lasting about 25% longer than the Mavic 2. Okay, so we can't end this video without addressing a few of the problems. I haven't had the best experience with the new Pro remote and app. Personally, I'm used to shooting with an iPad mini, so this new screen feels very small to me. It also makes the remote like twice as large, which is more awkward to fit in a bag compared to the old one, even if you had the regular remote instead of the Pro. For some reason, they decided to switch from DJI Go 4 app to the DJI Fly app, which in my opinion just seems way more amateur and is not only less intuitive, but it also is extremely handicapped and is missing a bunch of crucial features and settings. I hate that I can't use a finger dial to change exposures on the fly like with the M2. This really slows me down during valuable flight time. You can't control the return to home battery level. There's very limited gain and expo settings. There's no ability to hide the heads-up display info to check your framing, like how we used to be able to swipe down on the Mavic 2. You can no longer pan the camera around with the touchscreen. As of 2021, this drone is missing a lot of features. No panoramas, no hyperlapses. Yeah, it's very annoying how crippled this camera is right now, but hopefully that's fixed with the January firmware update. Lastly, the new case is cool and I like the concept to keep it more safe, but I do have a small pet peeve. When picking this up in its folded state, your hands are basically getting sliced by the propeller blades. It's just a weird quirk with the redesign that they overlooked. The price tag definitely stings, and it's annoying that it's unfinished in some ways, but it is undeniably improved from the Mavic 2, including in many ways that I didn't even expect it to be. For me personally, the most exciting upgrades are the color accuracy, the highlight and flare control, and low light performance. Look, this isn't for everybody. If you're a professional who makes money and needs the top of the line tool, then yeah, go for it. But if you're a hobbyist or you just occasionally do jobs, it's overkill. Go get the Air 2S, that's my recommendation. It all depends what you shoot most. When it comes to well-lit, daytime scenes, those differences are going to be very minor, but where this drone is really going to thrive is in those golden hour or twilight scenes, which is way more common for me. So down below, I put a link to a Google Drive folder of a bunch of raw files from this video, so you can download them, play around, and test the results for yourself. So my prediction or hope for the Mavic 4 is that we get a full frame sensor or interchangeable lenses. So we'll see what happens, but hopefully we don't have to wait 3 years again to get it. I did a ton of research for this video, so if you found it helpful in any way, go ahead and tickle that like button, subscribe if you like the sound of my voice, and ring the bell if you're a true diehard fan. Cheers, my friends. We'll meet up again soon.